Hi, thanks for joining us for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. I'm Chris Cooper. Hollies are a favorite shrub in the landscape, and today we're going to plant one. Also, a fruit tree is a long-term commitment, and you want to choose one that will be disease-free. That's just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Jordan Diamond. Jordan's Director of Landscape at the University of Memphis, and Mr. D will be joining me later. All right, Jordan, how you doing today?
Doing good.
Good. So we're here at your playground, the University of Memphis.
Yes.
Right? Looks like we'll be planting hollies.
Yeah, we're going to be planting a Japanese holly called Soft Touch.
Soft touch.
Yes,
How about
because
that?
it's soft to touch.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, we're going to plant this a little bit wider than the container, but not as deep. You know, want to have up out of the ground just a little bit. The first thing we're going to do is look at the root system of this.
Can you get it out? All right, there you go.
And as you can see, this is really well filled with roots. It's starting to come out the bottom. These circling roots need to be stopped, so we'll put a few cuts in the circling roots. You can use it with a shovel, but I like to use this just to give it a little cut.
And tell us, what does that do, Joelle?
This stops these circling roots from circling in the container, because they will just keep circling in the once you plant them. When you cut them like this, where it's cut, these roots will stop going in a circle, because all the roots want to do is anchor the shrub going away from the center of the shrub.
Good.
So stopping the circling will cause the roots to go away from the center of the shrub, and it'll anchor itself. And that's about all you have to do.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
So we'll dig a hole
So
a
we
little
go ahead
bit
and
wider.
get started, right? Oh, this is, nice.
Well, we did do a little bit of mending and tilling here before we
man.
planted this section. And it makes a difference.
Oh, it made it easy on me. I like that. Make sure to get it wide. All right.
Wide is better.
Wide is better.
Since I have this, I will measure the depth with this. And we'll see. I think it's deep enough.
All right. Look at
We'll
that.
square off the bottom
Okay.
so we won't leave any air pockets underneath it. Place the plant in.
Oh, look at that.
Make sure it has, you know, all plants have a face, and to me this looks like it's the back part of it. The better part forward to me is right there.
So all plants have a face. I like
They
that.
all have faces.
Okay.
And then we will just
I want to see the smiling face, right? Look at that.
fill in, leaving some of it up out of the ground.
Okay.
Now when we mulch, the mulch will go over the top.
Okay.
And that
a little bit.
it's nice and planted and ready to continue growing in this bed.
How about that? Oh, I'm getting better, Joelle. I'm
It's
getting better.
That looks good.
Right.
And now you see we've put the roots out of the ground just a little
Right.
bit because we want it to be well drained.
Okay.
And we are going to put mulch over the top of it, which will cover the root system.
Good deal.
But we want it to be well drained, and we want those roots in the bottom to have plenty of air circulation so they can grow and grow out from the plant.
Sounds good.
Well, we've got a few more to plant, and I'm going to have Ashley and Zodrick come and finish planting these for us.
Good deal. Y'all come on in. Good deal. All right. So what else do we need to know about hollies?
Well, this Japanese holly, they like zones 5 through 7.
Okay.
And one thing that I've noticed in this last winter, we had a really severe cold snap that made a lot of the evergreen broadleaf shrubs and trees defoliate.
Yeah, sure did.
I mean, it was really bad. But you know, we have some of these at the nursery here at the university, and they stayed green and never had any problems
How about that?
in a container up out of sight of the ground. So this is going to be a good plant for us because it goes up to zone 5.
Okay.
And we are here in zone 7. So again, you know, going up a little bit in zones,
Yeah, the 70.
just to make sure
yeah.
that they can take some severe cold weather that we have, and yet it does well in zones 7 and sometimes even 8 and 9, but
that?
not as much in 8 and 9 because they do get the heat and humidity they don't like.
Okay.
Because they'll get more. Japanese holly get a lot more of the diseases and pest problems
Oh, gotcha.
when it's hot and humid.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you're going to plant these there in that area, you might want to make sure they're extremely well drained.
Yeah, it's got to be
Extremely
well
well
drained.
drained.
That is for sure. But these look good though, and I'm just glad to know that they survived that harsh winter that we had this
They
past
really
winter.
did, and they did a good job. So but they have the same problems that Japanese hollies have, which is a lot of the disease problems, but that's usually caused by being wet too long. So well-drained areas are essential for them.
Okay. So again, planting high will help
Planting
with that.
high will help all of that.
Let's talk about some other hollies that people may be interested in.
Yeah, there's a lot of Chinese hollies that are dwarf and good for foundation plants, just like these Japanese hollies, like the Carissas. But they have a wider leaf on them, and that's they're Chinese hollies.
Okay.
They also do well, but some of them have had trouble this year
Yeah.
when we had that cold snap.
Sure.
But they also do well, and especially in drought. The Carissa holly does very well in a drought situation.
Okay.
And that does good. There's also a native holly that's called Yopon,
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
and they did very well in cold and heat. So that's another good holly to choose for a foundation plant.
Okay. Yeah, so people just do their research. There are all kind of hollies out there.
There
Find the
are.
right one for your situation.
That's
all right.
right.
Thank you, Joellen. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right.
You're here to talk about iron chlorosis, and this is a very good example of iron chlorosis. You see the dark green veins in the leaves, and this is a sign that the plant is not getting the nutrients that it needs. One of the ways to fix iron chlorosis is, of course, to add some iron. You can use liquid iron and mix it up in water according to the directions on the bottle and water the plant. If that still doesn't work, then I would get a soil pH test done, because the pH might be off so that the plant isn't able to take up nutrients, because the pH is holding all of the nutrients in the ground and not allowing the plant to get to them. But hopefully a little bit of liquid iron and these plants will be just fine.
All right, Mr. D, let's talk about apple tree varieties. All right. What kind of information you have for us?
I got some good information.
Yes, you do.
There's lots to choose from.
Okay.
There are 5,000 varieties
5,000.
worldwide, and fortunately, only 2,000 of them are grown in this country.
That's a lot.
So we only have 2,000 to choose from.
Okay.
And what I did is I did a little searching around, and for homeowners, I think disease resistance is very important, because
agree.
most homeowners, and I'm one,
Yes.
I don't do as good a job spraying my apple trees as I need to. And so if I can have some disease resistance, then that's going to help me produce a nice apple. Purdue University did an excellent job comparing different varieties and looking at disease resistance. And I have some information from Purdue that I want to share with you. And it's got hundreds, like probably 100 varieties plus
It's a good chart.
in this publication, and it's highlighted the ones that are resistant to apple scab, which is one of the primary fungal diseases of apples, fire blight, juniper rust, and powdery mildew. And let me just list these off, and after I get through, we'll talk a little bit more about why you may or may not see these in the grocery store when you go shopping for apples.
Okay. And Mr. D, we will have the link to that publication on our
Great,
website.
that's great.
Okay.
Once again, the disease-resistant varieties are highlighted on the publication.
Okay.
And the first one is Crimson Crisp. It is very resistant to apple scab, moderately resistant to powdery mildew and fire blight, and susceptible to the rust, cedar apple rust, juniper rust.
Okay. Right.
The Enterprise is a variety that's resistant to scab, fire blight, juniper rust, susceptible to powdery mildew. Florina or Quarina is another one that's resistant to everything except the juniper rust. Freedom is resistant to all of those four different diseases and problems. Gold Rush, very resistant, moderately resistant to apple scab and fire blight. In that order, but susceptible to the rust and powdery mildew. Liberty, resistant to all four. Mac Free, resistant to all four. Nova Easy Grow is resistant to everything except the juniper rust. Okay. Nova Mac is very resistant to all four of those diseases. Nova Spy is resistant to, I don't understand this, it's resistant to apple scab, susceptible to juniper rust, moderately resistant to powdery mildew, and under fire blight it has not applicable. So I assume they didn't test it for fire blight because it is very applicable. So I would kind of worry about Nova, and then it's Nova Spy, so maybe.
It's in the name, Nova Spy.
It's in the name, I don't know. Prima is very resistant to apple scab and powdery mildew, moderately susceptible to fire blight, and very susceptible to juniper rust. Priscilla, resistant to all four. Pristine is the one that I'm familiar with. It's very resistant to apple scab and resistant to fire blight, susceptible to juniper rust, but resistant to powdery mildew. Surprise, resistant to apple scab and powdery mildew, but susceptible to fire blight and the rust. Williams Pride is the last one that's very resistant to apple scab and juniper rust and resistant to fire blight and powdery mildew. So that's 14 varieties of apples that have some really good disease resistance. And again, you may or may not be familiar with these varieties when you buy them from the grocery store, because commercial growers, they're going to go in there, most of them are going to have follow a strict spray schedule. So they choose their varieties based upon taste, and a lot of them are the Fuji, Gala. You know, we see those. We see Red Delicious and Yellow Delicious apples out there, and Cameo and Granny Smith. But all of those are susceptible. Now, I see Granny Smith is resistant to the rust, but is susceptible to scab, very susceptible to fire blight, and very susceptible to powdery mildew. And also, when you plant these varieties, make sure that you pay attention to the rootstock, because rootstock determines the size of the tree. These apples are grafted onto rootstocks that can be dwarfing rootstock, which makes the tree very small, semi-dwarf, which is a little larger, and then full size, which would be a big old apple tree.
So if we're saying they're resistant, does the homeowner still have to spray though?
I probably would, because this is not all of the diseases. There are a lot of diseases. Fly speck. There's black rot. And, there are a lot of diseases. These are only 4 diseases. There are 4 major diseases. It would be a good idea, if you can, to go ahead and do a cover spray for apples, and that would be a great idea to do that every
cover spray.
7 to 10 days.
Wow.
But I do understand that, I just can't do it. I'm busy, and if you have a job and you have other commitments, and you got those 4 or 5 apple trees out there in the backyard, that in the back of your mind, you need to go out there every Saturday. Well, Saturday rains Saturday, you can't do it. So it's really hard, and I understand that.
And you know that from personal experience.
I know that from personal experience, and I do this for a living, and I still don't do the job that I need to do. So if I have natural resistance, then that helps me. That helps me a lot, especially with the really devastating diseases like fire blight.
Right.
And that's the first one that I'm going to see.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Fire
the first
blight
one
usually shows up first for most
Right.
people, and those
Right.
are the calls that we get at the extension office about fire blight.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So if you're using those cover sprays, we want to tell folks make sure they read and follow the label.
That's exact. Follow the label.
Follow the label.
Exactly right.
All right, Mr.
Yeah.
D. It's good
I got it.
information about those apple tree varieties. It's a lot too. How about that?
It's amazing the number of varieties that are out there. It's one thing that's amazing about apple is one that tastes good may or may not make the best pie. Some of the best tasting apples off the tree, the pie is kind of bland, and then some of them that are so tart that'll wake you up, kind of like ammonia, make the best apple pies, and fried apple pies, and the southern apple, nothing like an apple pie with a little ice cream on top.
So I guess you've eaten a few apple pies in
I
a
have
day,
eaten,
right?
I've eaten more than my share of apple pies.
All right. Well, we appreciate that good information. All right.
Good deal.
Before you put your plant material into the ground, it's always a good idea to inspect the soil for wildflowers or weeds, however you want to say it. What I see here is going to be some black medic, and you don't want to introduce this black medic to your nice landscape bed. So I would go in here, just make sure you pull it out, see if you can get it out by the roots, if at all possible. Look at that, fibrous root system there. Okay. Just clean it out the best you can. Get all of those weeds out because they will try to go to seed, okay? Then once you finish doing that, then your plant material will be ready for your nice landscape bed. All right, Joellen, here's our Q&A segment. You ready?
I'm ready.
These are some interesting questions.
Yeah.
All right. So here's our first viewer email. What is the best time and method to plant elderberry cuttings or plants? Also, is it advisable to cross-pollinate? If so, what species should we pursue? And this is Andy from Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
So what do you think about that?
Well, elderberries are no different from any other plant that you would propagate. You're trying to find the spot between where last year's growth ended and the next year's growth started.
Okay.
That transition zone is a zone of activity, and when you try to propagate any plant in that area where the leaf scars are, you will be very successful.
How about that?
So yeah, take cuttings there. I personally would put rooting hormone on them and stick them in some moist soil.
Okay.
I would put a baggie over them to simulate a greenhouse and keep them out of direct light
Okay.
and keep them moist, and they should root that way.
Okay. And the best time to do that?
Is usually early in usually May, June.
Okay.
Those are good because
So
the
spring?
new growth has already
Okay.
started, and you'll be able to find that transition zone.
Okay. So spring after the threat of frost, for the
Yes.
most part. What about cross-pollinating? though?
Yes. Now there are a lot of different types of elderberry, and I'm assuming that they want berries.
Yeah, that's what I would
So two berries that are good to have. You're supposed to have more than one elderberry to be able to produce berries.
Okay.
And I would get the two varieties called Adam and York.
Adam and York.
Adam and
Okay.
York. And if he's new to it and he really wants success faster, you can go ahead and you can find both of those varieties in a plant
Okay.
and buy the plant.
Okay.
But yes, you can root them.
So yes, you can root them. Yeah, spring after the threat of frost. Yeah, you need cross-pollination.
Yeah.
So Adam, York. There's a Johns. There's a Nova. Yeah. So there's some varieties there that
Yeah.
you can actually choose from. And if you have any further questions, then I would just go to Michigan State Extension and see if they have a publication for you about elderberry.
Good,
All
That's a good idea.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that question. Here's our next viewer email. Can I avoid verticillium wilt by growing my strawberries in pots? And this is John on YouTube. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a great idea.
I think it's a good idea.
I mean, because the verticillium is found in the ground, in the dirt, and if you take that out of, don't put potting soil in the container, don't put dirt from the ground in there, then I see that would probably work.
I think that'll work. Verticillium wilt, as we know, is a soil-borne fungus.
Right.
right? So yeah, if you get it out of the ground and in a raised bed maybe or in a pot, then you should be fine.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. So thank you for the question, Joe. We appreciate that. All right, here's our next viewer email. I have 2 fig trees that I planted a few years ago. They have never produced a fig. My son lives next door and planted the same type at the same time, and his trees produced. How do I get my figs to produce? And this is Mary from Madisonville, Tennessee. So this one's interesting, right?
Yes.
Same type, right?
Just next door.
Just next door. One produced, one didn't.
Well, my question to her would be this: is it planted in a similar environment the other one is? Like, is it getting enough sun? Do you have more? Put it in a more shady area?
That's what I would think.
Then the other question is, are you taking care of it too much? If you're putting too much water on it, or maybe not enough, if we had a drought. Also, are you fertilizing it too much? Because high nitrogen will prevent it from producing fruit.
Right.
And most fruit-producing plants like to think that they need to reproduce, so you don't want to put too much nitrogen and too much water on them.
Okay.
You want to think them, kind of starve them just a little bit, so that they go ahead and say, oh, I need to produce fruit.
Right. Yeah, I can go with that, but I definitely thought about the fertility. Is it too much nitrogen fertilizer? Because there's no indication of whether they fertilize or not, but that's the first thing that came to mind, of course. And then, like you mentioned, it's irrigation, of course, is very important. pH is important as well, but figs are pretty easy.
Yeah.
They're pretty easy. So yeah, just look at those conditions, Miss Mary, and hope that helps you out there, all right? And yeah, next time you have more figs than your son. How about that?
There you go.
There you go. All right, here's our next viewer email. How can I get rid of greenbrier in my flower beds without harming the good plants that are planted there? I can't pull up the vibe with all those thorns. And this is Jan from Portsmouth, Virginia. So we know greenbrier has a lot of thorns, right? But this is in a flower bed. So
yes.
How do you control those in a flower bed, you think?
Well, I mean, the herbicides would probably be the best thing, but I know she doesn't want to harm anything, but you can just do a wiping on the leaves method to get them out. One thing you got to understand about greenbrier is that it has an extensive rhizome system underground. In fact, it will produce the rhizome system underground before you even see a leaf come up. So pulling it up is going to be next to impossible.
It's going to be tough.
It's
going to be tough.
But the herbicide will help get rid of it because it will translocate down into the rhizomes. It may not get all of them, but as it keeps coming up and you keep doing that, you can get rid of it. And there is an extension publication, I think in the University of Georgia, that we can put on the website that might help.
Might help with that?
Understand the greenbrier and how it works.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Yeah, rhizome tuber system. Yeah, so it's going to be definitely tough. One suggestion I have though, if you just kind of cut it close to the ground as possible, and then use a sponge or a paintbrush, 41% glyphosate, let the turgor pressure kind of pull it down into the rhizome, those tubers, they may help. That way you don't have to worry about, spraying and drift and things like that. So that's another way, it may help. But that publication will have some good information in there about treating greenbrier, which is tough.
Yeah, and it's a favorite, the berries of it are a favorite of birds. And the birds are the ones that help put it everywhere.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's instantly fertilized once it goes through the gut of a bird for the most part. All right, Miss Jan, hope that helps you out there. Appreciate that question. Good luck. Here's our next viewer email. We have a problem with our cedar trees dying. This is happening to most of the cedars in our area. Our winters haven't been extremely cold and summers have been hot. Is there anything you can suggest to get rid of this problem? Even arborists seem at a loss for suggestions. So this is Barb from Windsor, Ontario.
Oh, wow.
So how about that?
Yeah.
So what are we thinking here?
Well, from the picture, I've noticed that looks like the ones that are not doing well are a little bit smaller than the rest of the hedge that she's got going on. And I'm wondering if there's a tree behind it. I'm wondering if it's in the root system of that tree is, kind of mixing with the hedge in the end of it there. And she might, she talked about being hot. Well, they don't like to be dry. And if that tree is taking away, if she's putting moisture on it and that tree is taking away more moisture, she might need to water that end a little bit more.
That's right.
Of course, you know, at some point it might, you know, she might have to replace those.
Yeah.
And she might want to try something different that'll take a little bit drier situation and sunny in that spot.
Yeah, cedar trees, yeah, they need a lot of moisture, you know, especially when you're going through drought-like conditions. So yeah, it looks like it's competition there, you know, from the tree that's behind it, you know, from what we can tell from the picture.
From the picture.
But yeah, and we noticed something else too. You know, this usually happens when you plant a monoculture, you know, of plant material. So what do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said if I replaced them, if they actually, you know, did not survive, I would consider putting something else there.
Sure, sure. Yeah, because this could happen.
Yeah, it could happen again.
Yeah, so, yeah, Ms. Barb, yeah, watering, you know, definitely during drought-like conditions will help. I don't know if those cedar trees can recover, you know, from that, but I would definitely look at some more material, plant material that is. So thank you, Ms. Barb, for that question. We appreciate that. Joanna, that was fun, as always, so thank you much. Thank you much.
Welcome.
Remember, we love to hear from you. Send us an email or letter. The email address is familyplot@wkno.org, and the mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee 38016. Or you can go online to familyplotgarden.com. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about hollies or apple trees, head on over to familyplotgarden.com. We have over 1,000 videos about all sorts of gardening things, and each one has links to research publications about that topic. Be sure to join us next week for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.